Napoleon's Invasion of Russia by Brittany Platt, Jennifer Richards, Cameron Schultz, and Morgan Wilson. In 1861, Charles Menard, a French civil engineer, charted the painful truth of Napoleon's failed invasion of Russia in 1812. With remarkable clarity, Menard displayed geography, time, temperature, route, and troop numbers with data visualization. The top beige line shows the large army heading towards Moscow, while the black line shows their return, narrowing as men die along the way. Now, 162 years later, we explore again the route of Napoleon's grand armies from their preparations in Paris to Moscow and back.
In 1812, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte was master of Europe. Having defeated the major powers of Austria, Prussia, and Russia in battle, Napoleon had extended the French Empire into Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Spain, and Switzerland, as seen in the map above. Great Britain, the only remaining major power left to challenge Napoleon, was protected by the English Channel and the powerful Royal Navy. Unable to invade, Napoleon instead issued the Berlin Decree in 1806, establishing the Continental System and imposing an economic embargo in order to defeat Britain. Under the terms of the system, all French-controlled territory, as well as its allies and neutral nations, were prohibited from conducting trade with Britain. While Russia had agreed to the Continental System in the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, the embargo severely damaged the Russian economy, and in 1810 Tsar Alexander I of Russia resumed trade with Britain. Following a continued worsening of relations between the two empires, Napoleon chose to invade and assembled an army of some 600,000 troops, 180,000 horses, and 1,372 cannon from France and its allies in June 1812 on the Russian border in the Duchy of Warsaw and East Prussia.
Philippe Paul de Ségur describes the scene of soldiers first approaching the bridge in his book Napoleon's Russian Campaign. Enthusiasm ran so high that two divisions of the vanguard, contending for the honor of crossing first, almost came to blows and were restrained with difficulty. Napoleon was impatient to set foot on Russian territory. Without faltering, he took that first step towards his ruin. He stood for a time at the head of the bridge, encouraging the soldiers with his look. All saluted him with their usual "Vive l'Empereur." They seemed more excited than he.
The Battle of Borodino was the largest battle of the invasion and the deadliest day until the Marne in World War I. Fighting began at 6 in the morning, and by noon, the flèches dug by the Russians had changed hands 7 times. Napoleon's marshals asked him to deploy the Imperial Guard to break through the Russian lines, but he refused. By the afternoon, the French were in control of the battlefield, and Napoleon again declined to use the Imperial Guard. By the evening, Kutuzov's troops had retreated from the battlefield and meant to defend their new position. The Grand Army shelled the new position, but exhausted, outnumbered, and 1,800 miles from the French capital without the use of the Imperial Guard, they would not attack. The Russians retreated further that night.
The losses were enormous. The French 25,000 and the Russian 38,000 men in killed, wounded, and prisoners. The Battle of Borodino has been called the bloodiest fight of the century.
In a letter to Alexander I, Emperor of Russia, Napoleon wrote, "The superb and beautiful city of Moscow no longer exists. Rostopchina gave orders to burn it. 400 incendiaries were arrested on the spot, all of whom declared that they had received their orders from the governor and the director of police. They were shot. The fire at last appears to have ceased. 3/4 of the buildings have been burned. The other quarter remains. Such conduct is atrocious and useless. Why destroy one of the most beautiful cities in the world, the work of centuries, for so paltry an end? It is the same line of conduct that has followed from Smolensk and has left 600,000 families homeless. The fire engines in Moscow were either broken or made way with, and a portion of the arms in the arsenal given to malefactors, which obliged us to fire a few shots at the Kremlin in order to disperse them. Humanity, the interests of your Majesty and of this great city, required that the city should be confided to me as a trust, since it was exposed by the Russian army. It should not have been left without administration, magistrates, and civil guards. Incendiaries authorized pillage, to which the soldiers surrendered themselves in order to dispute the debris with the flames. If I imagined for an instant that such a state of affairs was authorized by your Majesty, I should not write this letter, but I hold it impossible that, with your Majesty's principles and heart, with the justice of your Majesty's ideas, you could authorize excesses that were unworthy of a great sovereign and great nation. I wage war against your Majesty without animosity. A note from you before or after the last battle would have stopped my march, and I should even have liked to sacrifice the advantage of entering Moscow. If your Majesty retains some remains of your former sentiments, you will take this letter in good part. At all events, you will thank me for giving you account of what is passing at Moscow.
Kutuzov had been preparing his 80,000 troops at Tarantino since the beginning of October. Napoleon's forces were weakened from the lack of supplies during their time in Moscow. Needing to travel further beyond the nearly destroyed city to find food, they tired both themselves and their horses. Napoleon denied the generals who requested to be transferred back to France in the face of worsening conditions, and he also ignored reports from Murat about the developing situation around Tarantino. Kutuzov attacked the French forces on October 18th, the same day Napoleon ordered the evacuation of Moscow. The battle saw smaller losses than others, but was a Russian victory. Napoleon's reaction to the loss was to speed up the evacuation. Maloyaroslavets was the third largest battle of the campaign and featured bitter fighting. The town changed hands 9 times in one day and was ultimately burned down, except for a stone monastery. It was decided as a French victory, but an expensive one. French generals remarked that with 2 more victories like Maloyaroslavets, Napoleon would not have an army. The battle showed Napoleon how fiercely the Russian troops would fight. 8 of Napoleon's generals were killed or wounded in the battle.
The Berezina River barred Napoleon's remaining troops in their progression west, but were able to escape because of the 2 crossing bridges. The French army crossing took days, and the majority of the army was able to cross on November 27th and November 28th. The next day, Napoleon was forced to flee this position because of the approaching Russian army and destroyed the 2 bridges behind him. The destruction caused thousands of men, women, and children to perish on their eastern riverbanks. The non-combatants were crushed by carriages and horses, or succumbed to the flames in Berezina River. The majority of the French army's crossing was due to the inactivity of the Russians, as both sides were reluctant to continue fighting and did not have the strength for it. The battle was considered a victory for Napoleon, since its army was able to escape and flee to the eastern bank, even though Napoleon lost 20,000 to 25,000 men after leaving Berezina. The Battle of Leipzig was a significant defeat for Napoleon. He started a new offensive in Berlin, Germany in 1813, but ultimately had to flee the city when enemy troops continued to surround their army and eventually converged on them. The French army was able to defend against multiple confrontations, but they also took heavy damages with their defeat. After 9 hours of battle, the French army was pushed to the outskirts of the city and retreated. French losses resulted in over 38,000 men killed or wounded. This was one of the most damaging battles for Napoleon on his travels back to France.
The defeat of Napoleon's invasion of Russia was catastrophic for the emperor's ambitions in Europe. The losses suffered by the Grande Armée were devastating. Of the over 600,000 French and Allied troops who participated in the invasion, less than 100,000 returned across the Niemen, with some 100,000 likely having deserted and another 100,000 captured. the remainder having died as a result, in addition to losing 920 cannon and nearly all their horses. Recognizing his vulnerability, the following year Napoleon's enemies united against him. Austria, Great Britain, Prussia, Russia, Spain, and other nations formed a coalition against him. While Napoleon was able to quickly assemble a new army, the veteran French troops and material lost in Russia could not be replaced. By 1814, Napoleon's enemies had invaded France itself, and he was forced to abdicate his throne. After a brief return from exile in 1815, Napoleon was defeated for the final time at the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium. The invasion of Russia is seen as one of the most critical factors that led to the downfall of Napoleon's French empire.